welcome to Website and TV. My guest today is Marcin Chirowski, Global Head of Content Marketing for EF, a provider of English language training all across the world. And the topic of our conversation today is content creation, which is clearly a broad topic. And I'm going to start with quite a broad question, which is, what makes good content?
It's a great question. That's a great question, actually. So thank you for having me here.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, so that's one of the biggest challenges, to be honest. So the content creation become like one of the biggest challenges, only simply because that so many people creating content, and more increasingly, pretty much everyone is creating content now.
Yeah.
So there's like agencies creating content, there's freelancers creating content, there's brands creating content, there's just user-generated content is just everywhere. So that's kind of the main challenges. In recent studies that what Moz was finding out with BuzzSumo, they look at nearly like 1 million articles and look at what's the share, what's the kind of how they're sharing and stuff like that. So what they find out, if majority of the articles have 0 shares, first of all, and then most of the content pieces are never shared and never see any light of anything good. So as a marketers, it seems like we actually in this phase we're creating a lot of crap, to be honest. It is like majority of the stuff we do is it's
not what people want.
Yes, it's not what people want, essentially. So because they're not sharing it, they're not linking it to it. So like the same study shows that 75% of the links of the content pieces have 0 links. So it just shows that people not even linking those. So essentially, going back to your question, what's good? So if we know that's the biggest challenge, we should look at, I need to create something, not only good, but actually great. That will, first of all, resonate with your target audience. That's probably the best advice to go with your target audience. Essentially, look at how that's going to resonate with them, how it's going to engage them, how it's going to help them, essentially.
Yeah.
And it's not about just nice surroundings of the contents. Essentially, if someone is really diving into, that's at this moment they will decide whether they should stick reading it or consuming it, or they will leave. So essentially, that should be definitely engaging, definitely engaging, sort of memorable, shareable. So that's sort of the principles of good content, which was the broad question, but yes. Yeah,
but we got there with a good answer. So obviously, we're talking about that. There's a lot of content then that doesn't get shared, and we know that there is a lot of different kind of content there, from white papers to videos and everything in between that you can really have. So how do you decide which type of content is going to be the right one to use, for your message and for your target audience?
All right. So I would definitely start with the message. So essentially look at, what the message you're trying to come up with and what you're trying to communicate, and essentially work out your way backwards to saying, what content type fits there. So it could be blog posts, it could be, just, some social activities, it could be videos. But essentially, I would start small. So I would start small and try to find what actually resonates with the audience, and then work from there. So if something is getting shared, if something is getting views, then you can probably recreate that and then just go from that. Just work out different formats.
Yeah. So a lot of research as well into just finding out what that audience is already enjoying and not assuming Yeah. So if you could give 3 key points to say to somebody who's going to start creating some content, what would they be?
Okay. All right. So that might sound repetitive, but I'm just going to mention the audience one more time. So definitely go with your audience. Definitely look at, the quality of the content, the uniqueness of the content. And also keep doing this consistently. So what we often see is that people actually create like random content and they forget about it. Yeah. So the consistency is also one of those things that we should consider.
Okay. And we know that with, creating engaging, unique, clever content comes, resources and time, and especially when you're talking international businesses and across multiple markets, kind of finding the resources to actually create this content is pretty tricky. So are there any tips or tactics people can use to kind of scale content?
Yes, of course they are. It's one of another challenges in content creation is essentially doing this consistently, and at the international level it's even more sort of complex. So also resources are an issue, like you mentioned. So I would definitely advise of looking at, first of all, to develop some sort of process and then some sort of procedures. Because typically marketing teams are always under pressure in terms of just more and more work. There's so many things we should do. It should be doing, told by our bosses. But essentially, which is why I would probably suggest going with freelancers or marketplaces or professional services that could help you, execute that. Once you have the clear process and the procedures in place, you could start scaling it up. The localization aspect is probably the trickiest part because you don't want to just simply translate the content. No. What we want to do is transcreate the content, especially if you have something that should be localized. So what the difference is essentially, it's almost like recreating based on the English version. You would recreate the same piece of content by the local copywriter or someone that will have their own local context. And by doing that, you almost like created original content, So that will be the scaling part.
So that's quite a good way to do it, though, to use the English or use your source, I guess, language as a base point. So you've generated the idea already, but just making it appropriate for that other market and not.
Yes, that's what we've seen what works best. And essentially, sometimes, of course, you need to start with local pieces. Like we have examples like in Japan, who will have comics on manga, for example. So that would never work in other markets.
No.
So there are definitely local specific ideas that you should work. We've got like a couple of things in Mexico that was very local, very specific for those markets. Would never work in others. So you could probably have like your base content, which should be your main to be transcreated, and then you have local specific.
So you need a bit of a balance.
Balance.
Okay. And there's a lot of talk always around with content about kind of repurposing content and using it for different purposes and in different ways. So how can that be done, and what are the best ways to get the most out of a piece of content?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, we're recording a video now. So this is like perfect example how this could be repurposed. You can have the same piece of content turn into the podcast. You can turn this video into the blog post. You can repurpose that content in many ways. So essentially, having one type of content is not the end. So I would definitely recommend repurposing content. Yes, because it saves you time and it's also beneficial. If you see something working, you should definitely repurpose that in different formats.
And it is worth that effort, because you might think, well, if it already exists in the video format, everyone could just watch the video.
Yes.
But of course, not
but
everybody wants to.
There's also many other formats to be considered. So, and then not everyone's watching videos. That's one of the things. So only because we're producing that format in the video format, it doesn't necessarily mean that's how it's going to be consumed. So nowadays, like podcasts are like super popular, and people listen to them on the journey or the commute. So that's kind of then you've got written content which is consumed over the phones when they still have less time. So essentially, that you should take into consideration when repurposing content.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we're talking about generally about content, but have you got any kind of examples of brands that you know of that you think do a really great job of content marketing, especially globally?
Especially global, yes, absolutely. I mean, there's so many of them. So as a marketers, we sort of jumped on the bandwagon of content marketing actually, and there's so many brands are doing this now. So which is good and bad, So if for some reason it's good for the industry, it's growing and it's massive, but also we're creating a lot of content. So there are many brands that do this very well. I think the first example that comes to mind is essentially LinkedIn. As previously known as just collection of CVs and just CV library almost like, they shifted the entire company around actually content production. They've got multiple contributions in the professional space. They got white papers, ebooks, and so on. So now they consistently delivering they're almost like a publisher, a powerhouse. Yeah. So that's one of the bigger ones I can mention. Then you have like B2B and then more like a software space. So anything from cosmetics from Neil Patel, Moz, of course, great example there. Yeah. HubSpot, so those are the B2B. UK specific, I've seen one really good one, which is Simply Business. They do like insurance, like super boring subject. Yeah. But you can have an interesting spin on that and essentially what they do is have like helpful guides for SME in UK, and they just give them just helpful guides plus ebooks plus relevant content that is dedicated for that audience. Yeah. So those are the ones examples, and most likely there's just many others that do it well. At the same time, there's many people who do it very wrong, to be honest, and very just creating poor content. Yeah. So yeah.
Want to tell us any examples of those, or should we leave that?
let's probably leave that for them to figure out.
Yeah, we've probably all seen them. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.